Someone you love is going to die. You already know this. And when it happens, you will do something strange. You will gather people together. You will dress the body. You will speak to someone who can no longer hear you. You will feel the pull to mark the moment, as if the universe itself needs to be informed. And here is the thing. You have felt that pull for a very, very long time. Not years, not centuries, hundreds of thousands of years. The real answer to why you mourn the way you do is far stranger than grief. It reaches back to a version of you that had no language, no God, and no concept of the future. And yet that version of you did something that should have been impossible. It buried its dead. In 1908, in a rock shelter in southwestern France called La Chapelle-aux-Saints, two brothers, farmers, not archaeologists, dug into the earth and found a skeleton. It was a Neanderthal. Not just any skeleton tossed aside by time. This one was lying in a deliberate pit. Its head was resting in a slight hollow. Animal bones and flint tools had been placed around it. The position was not random. It was intentional. This creature, which modern humans once dismissed as a brutish animal with no inner life, had been put in the ground on purpose by people who felt something when it died. That discovery shattered the line between us and them. Because what you do when someone dies, the ritual, the gathering, the deliberate marking of a life, did not begin with religion. It did not begin with civilization. It began before language, before agriculture, before fire was fully understood. It began with a feeling that something important had ended, and that the ending deserved an answer. Archaeologist Paul Pettit has spent decades mapping the origins of mortuary behavior across the prehistoric record. His conclusion is stark. The impulse to treat the dead as something more than discarded matter is one of the oldest and most universal behaviors in the human lineage. It appears not just across cultures, but across species lines. The Neanderthals at La Chapelle-aux-Saints were not doing something human. Humans were doing something Neanderthal. The behavior predates us, but what were they actually doing? That is where it gets strange. Picture the oldest known burial site in the world. Not in France, not in the Middle East. Deep inside a cave system in South Africa. In a chamber so difficult to reach that researchers had to crawl through passages barely wide enough for a human body to pass. This place is called Rising Star Cave, and inside a chamber named the Denalidi Chamber, paleoanthropologist Lee Berger and his team found the bones of a creature called Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin that lived at least 300,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. And those bones were not scattered, they were arranged. They appeared to have been deliberately placed, in a space that required effort to reach, in a space that had no food, no water, and no practical survival value whatsoever. This creature had a brain roughly 1/3 the size of yours, and yet it appears to have treated its dead as something worth the effort of hiding. The researchers are still debating exactly what this means, but the debate itself tells you something. The behavior is too old, too deliberate, and too widespread to be accidental. So what were these early humans feeling? They were not necessarily feeling what you feel at a modern funeral. They were not meditating on the afterlife. They were not praying to a god. They were responding to something older than thought, something that lives in you right now, below the level of language. Neuroscientist and anthropologist Terence Deacon argues that the human brain evolved alongside symbolic behavior, that the ability to treat one thing as a stand-in for another thing, to give meaning to objects and gestures, is not a recent addition to the human mind. It is woven into the structure of how your brain makes sense of the world. When someone dies, your brain does not simply register the absence. It registers a rupture, a gap between what was expected and what now is. And the brain cannot leave ruptures alone. It fills them with ritual, with story, with repetition, with anything that gives the gap a shape. That is what your ancestors were doing in those caves. They were giving the gap a shape, and the shapes they chose were remarkably similar across thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years. In what is now Iraq, at the Shanidar cave site, Neanderthal remains were found surrounded by pollen, which some researchers interpreted as evidence of flowers placed on the body. The interpretation is still debated, but the physical positioning of the skeleton itself, with one arm deliberately tucked beneath the skull, suggests care. Suggests that someone moved the body into that position. Someone took the time. In what is now Spain, in caves along the northern coast, early modern humans ground red ochre, a blood-red mineral pigment, and painted bodies before burial. They placed shells, teeth, and carved objects alongside the dead. Some of these items came from hundreds of kilometers away. They were not practical. They were symbolic. Someone traveled a great distance to bring a thing that had meaning to leave it with someone who could no longer hold it. Think about that. Your ancestor walked for days to bring a shell to a grave, not for survival, for something else. Something that does not have a clean name. Something between love, fear, and the desperate human need to say, this mattered. Across the ancient record, one theme repeats. The dead were not simply disposed of. They were given something. Tools, food, pigment, ornaments, fire. And when you trace this behavior forward through time, through the pyramid builders, the Viking ship burials, the elaborate tomb cities of ancient China, the Mexican Dia de los Muertos offerings, the flowers you placed on a grave last year, the thread never breaks. It just changes costume. Because the function was always the same. Ritual gives the living somewhere to put the feeling. And the feeling has always been the same thing. The body is here, the person is not. And everything in the brain that evolved to track that person, their face, their voice, their place in the social group, is still firing, still looking, still expecting an answer that will never come. Psychologist John Archer, who has spent years studying grief as an evolutionary response, describes bereavement as the cost of attachment. Every social species pays it. Elephants linger over the bones of their dead, touching them with their trunks, returning to the same spot years later. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying the bodies of their infants for days after death, as if reluctant to accept what the body already knows. Corvids, the bird family that includes crows and ravens, engage in what some researchers cautiously describe as funeral behavior, gathering around a dead member of their group in a way that appears more than incidental. You are not unique in feeling the weight of death. You are unique in the complexity of what you built around that feeling. And what you built, it turns out, also built you, because ritual does something to the brain. It is not merely a response to loss, it is a technology for surviving loss. Researchers at Harvard Business School, in a study led by Alison Wood Brooks, found that individuals who performed rituals, even invented personally constructed rituals, after an experience of loss reported reduced grief and a stronger sense of control. The ritual did not need to be religious. It did not need to be traditional. It simply needed to be structured, intentional, and repeated. The brain reads ritual as signal, as meaning, as evidence that the rupture has been acknowledged and that life will continue on the other side of it. Your ancestors discovered this without knowing they discovered it. They began marking death not because they understood neuroscience. They began marking death because it worked. Because the people who gathered around their dead, who moved stones and laid flowers and painted bodies with red ochre, those people survived their grief well enough to have children, well enough to build communities, well enough to pass the behavior on. The ritual is not something culture added onto human biology. The ritual is part of the biology. And so here you are. Somewhere in the future of this moment, you will lose someone. And when you do, you will feel the ancient pull. You will want to gather people. You will want to speak words. You will want to bring something, a flower, a photograph, an object that carries meaning, and place it somewhere that marks the fact that a life was here. You will not be able to explain entirely why, and you will not need to, because that pull is not irrational. It is not mere sentiment. It is the oldest technology your species ever invented. A technology built not to deny death, but to make it survivable, to give the gap a shape, to say out loud or in silence, this mattered. We were here. Something like love existed in this place. Tonight, when you think about the people you love, you are doing what your ancestors did in the dark of a cave 300,000 years ago. You are tracking the ones who matter, and somewhere beneath language, beneath thought, you already know what that means.
If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel so that you don't have to find these videos.